The October sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds of the Riverside Country Club in Greenwich, Connecticut. Linda Martinez adjusted her navy blazer for the third time, her fingers trembling slightly as she watched her son Michael pose with his new bride, Sophia, against the backdrop of autumn foliage. The wedding had been everything she'd imagined: elegant, expensive, and utterly perfect. Everything except for one glaring detail. She felt completely invisible. "Mom, you look beautiful," Michael had said earlier, kissing her cheek before rushing off to greet another wave of guests. But that was 3 hours ago, and since then, Linda had watched from the sidelines as photographer after photographer captured moment after moment of her son's special day moments that, somehow, never seemed to include her. Linda had spent the last 18 months quietly supporting this wedding. While Michael and Sophia planned their dream ceremony, she had been working 16-hour days at her law firm, taking on extra cases to help cover the wedding expenses that Michael's tech startup salary couldn't quite stretch to meet. She'd paid for the flowers, those stunning white orchids that now adorned every table. She'd covered the difference for the upgraded menu when Sophia's heart was set on the lobster course. She'd even quietly handled the legal paperwork for the venue contract when complications arose. But standing here now, watching the photographer direct family groupings, Linda realized that all her support had been invisible too. "All right, let's get the Blackwood family together," announced the photographer, an energetic woman named Casey who wore her cameras like jewelry. The Blackwood Sophia's family immediately assembled. Her father, Senator Richard Blackwood, stood tall and commanding even in his tuxedo. Her mother, Catherine, glided over with the grace of someone who'd spent decades in the political spotlight. Sophia's brother, David, a Harvard-educated investment banker, positioned himself with the casual confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in any photograph. Linda watched as they arranged themselves in a perfect tableau of power and privilege. Senator Blackwood's hand rested proudly on his daughter's shoulder, while Catherine beamed with the satisfaction of a woman who'd just orchestrated a social triumph. The camera flashed repeatedly, capturing their golden hour glow. "Beautiful. Now let's get the Martinez family," Casey called out. Linda's heart lifted slightly as she stepped forward, smoothing down her blazer once more. She'd chosen this outfit carefully, professional but not severe, elegant but not attention-seeking. She wanted to look like the accomplished attorney she was, but also like the proud mother she'd always been. Michael appeared at her side, looking devastatingly handsome in his custom-fitted tuxedo. For a moment, Linda felt that familiar surge of maternal pride. Her son, the little boy she'd raised alone after his father walked out when he was 7. The teenager she'd supported through his awkward years and academic struggles, the young man she'd cheered on through college and his first job interviews, was now standing here as a successful adult, married to a brilliant woman from one of the most influential families in Connecticut. "Just you and Sophia, buddy," Casey said to Michael, raising her camera. "Let's get some shots of just the happy couple with the fall colors." Linda stepped back, assuming she'd be called back in for family shots in a moment, but Michael's arm remained around Sophia as they posed, and Casey continued shooting. Now with Sophia's family, Casey directed, and the Blackwoods moved in like a well-rehearsed ensemble cast. Linda waited. The photographer moved through various combinations: Michael and Sophia with Catherine, Michael and Sophia with the senator, Michael and Sophia with David. Each shot seemed to solidify their place in this new family constellation, and with each flash, Linda felt herself becoming more peripheral. "What about shots with Michael's mother?" Catherine Blackwood's voice cut through the autumn air. Linda's heart jumped with gratitude. Finally, someone had noticed her absence. Michael looked over at Linda, and for a split second, she saw something flicker across his face. Embarrassment? Annoyance? She couldn't quite read it, but whatever it was made her stomach drop. "Oh, right," Michael said, his voice oddly flat. "Mom, come here." But as Linda approached, she noticed the subtle body language shifts. Michael's arm around Sophia tightened almost protectively. Sophia's smile became more practiced, less genuine. The Blackwoods maintained their perfect postures, but there was a coolness in their expressions that hadn't been there moments before. "Actually," Michael said, glancing at his watch, "we're running behind schedule for the reception entrance. Casey, let's just grab a few more shots of the wedding party and call it good." The words hit Linda like a physical blow. She stood there 3 feet away from her son, dressed in her carefully chosen outfit, having spent months supporting this day, and she was being dismissed like an afterthought. Of course, Linda managed to say, her voice steady, despite the tremor she felt inside, "Don't let me hold things up." She stepped back and watched as the photographer captured the wedding party: Michael's college friends, Sophia's sorority sisters, the perfectly coordinated groomsmen and bridesmaids. Young, beautiful, successful people who belonged to Michael's new world in a way that Linda apparently did not. The reception was held in the club's grand ballroom. All crystal chandeliers and cream-colored linens. Linda found herself seated at table 7, not at the head table with the immediate family. Not even at table 2 with the extended relatives, but at table 7 with Michael's former co-workers and their spouses. People she'd met once or twice, who made polite conversation about her work before turning to discuss topics that didn't include her. From her seat, she could see the head table where Michael and Sophia held court with the Blackwoods. Senator Blackwood was telling some story that had everyone laughing, his hands gesturing expansively. Catherine was leaning toward Sophia, probably sharing some piece of political wisdom or social advice. Michael looked completely at home among them, laughing at the right moments, nodding seriously during the senator's more earnest observations. When it came time for toasts, Linda waited for Michael to acknowledge her, to thank her for her support, to mention the woman who'd raised him and helped make this day possible. Instead, his speech focused on Sophia, on her intelligence and beauty, on how lucky he felt to be joining the Blackwood family, on his gratitude to Senator and Mrs. Blackwood for welcoming him with such warmth. And of course, Michael said, raising his glass, to all our family and friends who've supported us on this journey. All. A collective acknowledgement that somehow made Linda feel more invisible than a specific omission would have. As the evening wore on, Linda found herself retreating further into observer mode. She watched Michael dance with Sophia, then with Catherine, then with various bridesmaids and female relatives. She waited for him to come find her for the traditional mother-son dance, but the moment never came. Instead, the DJ announced the last dance, and couples paired off around the dance floor while Linda sat at her increasingly empty table, collecting discarded napkins and straightening already straight silverware. The realization settled over her. Like a cold fog, she had become invisible in her own son's life, not through any dramatic confrontation or explicit rejection, but through 1,000 small exclusions, a gradual erasure that had culminated in this moment. She was the mother who'd supported everything from the shadows, and now she was expected to remain there permanently. At 11:30 p.m., as the last guests filtered out and the staff began cleaning up, Linda made her quiet exit. No dramatic departure, no tearful confrontation with Michael, no demand for recognition. She simply collected her small purse, nodded goodbye to the few people who noticed her leaving, and walked across the parking lot to her modest Honda Civic parked between a Mercedes and a BMW. As inconspicuous as everything else about her presence, that day. The drive home to her apartment in Stamford took 25 minutes. 25 minutes of Connecticut highways and residential streets. 25 minutes of replaying every moment of exclusion. 25 minutes of wondering how she'd become so dispensable to the person she'd devoted her life to. Raising Linda pulled into her parking space outside the small but tidy complex where she'd lived for the past 5 years. It wasn't glamorous, certainly. Nothing like the sprawling Blackwood estate in Greenwich, but it was hers. She'd worked for every square foot of it, every piece of furniture, every small comfort. Inside her apartment, she kicked off the heels that had been pinching her feet for hours and hung up the navy blazer that no one had really seen. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at her small kitchen table, staring out at the parking lot and the ordinary lives of her neighbors continuing their Saturday evening routines. For the first time all day, Linda allowed herself to cry. Not the dramatic sobs of a movie scene, but the quiet, steady tears of someone processing a profound disappointment. She cried for the little boy who used to run to her with scraped knees and hurt feelings. She cried for the teenager who'd needed her help with college applications and job interviews. She cried for the woman she'd been all these years, the one who'd thought that quiet support and unconditional love would be enough to secure her place in her son's life. Most of all, she cried because she knew that tomorrow she'd have to wake up and continue being Linda Martinez, successful attorney and apparently invisible mother, and somehow find a way to be okay with both of those identities. What Linda didn't know, as she sat in her kitchen crying quiet tears over her lukewarm tea, was that in approximately 7 hours her invisibility would become the most spectacular kind of visibility imaginable. The case she'd been working on for the past 8 months, the one that had kept her at the office until midnight most nights, the one that had consumed her thoughts even during wedding planning, was about to explode across every major news outlet in the country, and at the center of that explosion would be the Blackwood family. Linda's phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. She was already awake, sitting at her kitchen counter with coffee in the Sunday crossword puzzle, trying to distract herself from replaying yesterday's wedding. The generic ringtone jolted her from her brooding, and she glanced at the caller ID. Rebecca Chen, her colleague and closest friend at the law firm. "Linda, are you awake?" Rebecca's voice was breathless with excitement. "I'm up. Let's turn on the news. Channel 8, right now." Linda reached for her remote, puzzled by the urgency in Rebecca's tone. "Rebecca, what's going on? It's not even 7 in the morning. Just turn it on, trust me. The local morning news flickered to life, and Linda nearly dropped her coffee mug. There, filling her television screen, was a professional headshot of herself, the one from the law firm's website, next to the headline. Connecticut attorney exposes billion-dollar fraud scheme, double quotes, ... Linda Martinez, a partner at Henderson Shaw and Associates, has been quietly building what prosecutors are calling the most significant white-collar crime case in Connecticut's history, the anchor was saying. Martinez's 8-month investigation has uncovered a complex money laundering operation involving several high-profile political figures and business leaders. Linda's phone was still pressed to her ear, but she could barely hear Rebecca talking. Her attention was completely absorbed by the television, where her own face was now sharing screen space with mugshots and courthouse sketches. The investigation centers around what appeared to be a legitimate investment firm, Blackwood Capital Management, but which authorities now say was actually an elaborate front for moving illegal campaign contributions and foreign money through American political campaigns. Blackwood, the name hit Linda like ice water. She fumbled for the volume button, turning it up just as Senator Richard Blackwood's official portrait appeared on screen. Senator Richard Blackwood and his wife Catherine have been arrested at their Greenwich home early this morning, along with their son David Blackwood, who served as the managing director of the alleged fraudulent investment firm. The scheme allegedly moved over $1.2 billion through fake investments and shell companies over the past 6 years. Linda's coffee grew cold as she watched footage of the Blackwood estate, the same elegant grounds where she'd stood invisible just yesterday, now swarming with FBI agents and news trucks. She watched Senator Blackwood, still in his weekend casual clothes, being led to a federal vehicle in handcuffs. "Rebecca," Linda whispered into the phone, "are you seeing this? The whole world is seeing this? Linda, your phone is about to explode. Every major news outlet is trying to reach you. CNN, NBC, The Times. Everyone wants to interview the attorney who brought down a U.S. senator." As if summoned by Rebecca's words, Linda's phone began buzzing with incoming calls. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers, numbers from area codes she didn't recognize. Her quiet Sunday morning was evaporating before her eyes. "I need to call the office," Linda said, but even as she spoke, she realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just another white-collar case. This was national news. This was career-defining. This was the kind of case that attorneys dreamed about their entire careers, and somehow, in all her preparation for this moment, she'd never imagined it would happen the morning after her son's wedding. The morning after he'd excluded her from the family photographs with the very people who were now being arrested for federal crimes. Her doorbell rang. Linda peered through her front window and saw a news van parked outside her building, a reporter and cameramen already positioned near her door. As she watched, a second van pulled up. "Rebecca, there are news crews outside my apartment." "I'm not surprised." "Linda, you need to get somewhere safe where you can think clearly. This is huge. Do you understand how huge this is?" Linda was beginning to... She grabbed her laptop and a change of clothes, threw them into an overnight bag, and slipped out her building's back exit while the reporters were still setting up in front. 20 minutes later, she was in Rebecca's guest room in West Hartford, watching her own press conference from 8 months ago when she'd first announced the investigation. She barely recognized herself. In the old footage, she looked confident, professional, completely in control. She remembered that day, how carefully she'd prepared her statement, how nervous she'd been about the media attention, how proud she'd felt to be representing the interests of justice. Now, watching it again, she realized she looked powerful, authoritative, like someone who commanded respect. It was strange to see herself this way just hours after feeling so invisible. And dismissed, her phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized. "Michael." Linda stared at the phone for 3 rings before answering. "Mom." Michael's voice was tight, strained. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" "Good morning, Michael. How's married life? Don't joke. I'm watching the news. The Blackwood Sophia's parents there being arrested, and they're saying you're the one who..." His voice broke off. "The one who what? Michael? The one who's been investigating them? For months? While we were planning the wedding? While you were..." Again, he couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Linda found herself oddly calm. "While I was what? Michael? While I was supporting your wedding? While I was paying for the flowers and the upgraded menu? While I was being excluded from the family photos?" Silence on the other end. "Mom, I didn't know about the investigation. I mean, you never said anything. You never asked. You never asked what I was working on. Never asked why I was working such long hours. Never asked about any part of my life. You were too busy getting to know your new family. That's not fair." Linda looked at the television, where aerial footage showed FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence from the Blackwood estate. Fair, she repeated. Let's talk about fair, Michael. Yesterday at your wedding, I watched you pose for dozens of family photos. I watched you thank the Blackwoods for welcoming you into their family. I watched you give a toast about how grateful you were for their support. But when it came time to include your own mother, the woman who raised you, who paid for half your wedding, who spent the last 8 months building the case that just brought down your in-laws for billion-dollar fraud, was invisible, Mom. I was invisible, Michael? And now, 12 hours later, I'm on every major news network in the country. I'm getting calls from CNN and the New York Times. The Attorney General's office wants to discuss my testimony for the federal prosecution. Yesterday, I wasn't worth including in a family photo. Today, I'm the face of the biggest white-collar crime case in Connecticut history. She could hear Michael breathing on the other end, but he wasn't speaking. I need to ask you something, Linda continued, her voice steady but firm. Did you know any of it? Did you know what your new in-laws were really doing? Of course not. Michael's response was immediate and sharp. You think I would have, Mom? I had no idea. Sophia had no idea. We thought it was just a successful investment firm. Linda wanted to believe him. Part of her did believe him, but part of her wondered how much Michael had chosen not to see, how much he'd been willing to overlook in exchange for acceptance into the Blackwood family's glittering world. Where are you now? She asked. At the hotel. She's not doing well. Her whole family, Mom, her dad, her mom, her brother, they're all in federal custody. For the first time since answering the phone, Linda felt a stab of sympathy. Whatever else Sophia was, she was a young woman who'd just seen her entire family arrested on her wedding day. That was a trauma that would take years to process. I'm sorry, Michael. I really am. I know this is devastating for both of you. What happens now? With the case, I mean. Linda looked at her laptop, where emails from federal prosecutors and major news outlets were piling up faster than she could read them. Now I testify before a federal grand jury. Now I spend the next year helping to build the prosecution's case. Now I become the person who brought down a U.S. senator and exposed the kind of corruption people write books about. Another silence. Mom, Michael said finally, his voice smaller than she'd heard it in years. I'm sorry about yesterday, about the photos, about everything. Linda closed her eyes. I know you are. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, Michael. You can't go back and include me in those photos. You can't undo the way you treated me yesterday. But you can decide how you want to move forward. What do you mean? Linda opened her eyes and looked at the television, where her professional headshot was now sharing the screen with the headline Connecticut attorney honored for integrity in prosecution. A different news channel, a different angle on the same story. I mean, you can decide whether you want to be part of your mother's life going forward, or whether you want to keep treating me like I'm invisible, because I won't be invisible anymore. Michael, this case is going to change everything. I'm going to be in the public eye for months, maybe years. I'm going to be testifying before Congress. I'm going to be giving interviews and speeches, and probably writing a book about this investigation. She paused, letting that sink in. So you need to decide. Do you want to be the son who's proud of his mother's accomplishments? Or do you want to be the son who was too embarrassed to include her in his wedding photos the day before she became a national hero? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with years of complicated history and one very pivotal day. I want to be proud of you, Michael said quietly. I want to do better. Linda felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of a path toward it. Then you'll have that chance, she said. But, Michael, it's going to have to be on different terms than before. Everything is different now. After they hung up, Linda sat in Rebecca's guest room and watched the news coverage continue. There she was again and again, her face, her name, her 8-month investigation. CNN was calling it the Blackwood scandal. Fox News was running with Senator's billion-dollar betrayal. MSNBC had christened it the Connecticut corruption case. And at the center of all of it was Linda Martinez, the invisible mother who'd just become the most visible attorney in America. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Martinez, this is Anderson Cooper's producer at CNN. Mr. Cooper would like to interview you for tomorrow night's show. Are you available? Linda stared at the text for a long moment. 24 hours ago, she'd been sitting at table 7 at her son's wedding reception, invisible and ignored. Now, Anderson Cooper wanted to interview her on national television. She typed her response. I'll have my assistant coordinate with your team. Then she realized she'd need to hire an assistant. Everything was different now. By Wednesday morning, Linda had done interviews with CNN, NBC, CBS, and Fox News. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since Sunday, and her email inbox had grown to over 2,000 unread messages. The modest conference room at Henderson, Shaw and Associates had been transformed into a media staging area, complete with professional lighting and a backdrop featuring the firm's logo. Linda was learning to navigate this new reality, the one where she was no longer invisible. 5 minutes, Ms. Martinez, said Jake, the media coordinator the firm had hired to manage the unprecedented attention. Linda nodded and checked her appearance in the compact mirror Rebecca had given her. 3 days of national television had taught her things about camera angles and lighting that she'd never needed to know as a behind-the-scenes attorney. She was about to go live with Good Morning America when her assistant, newly hired as of Monday, knocked on the door. Ms. Martinez, your son is here. He says he needs to speak with you urgently. Linda felt her stomach clench. She'd spoken to Michael twice since Sunday's phone call, both brief conversations where he'd asked about her well-being and updated her on Sophia's condition. Sophia was staying with a college friend, trying to process the reality that her entire family was facing federal prison time. Michael had moved back to his apartment temporarily, giving his new wife space to grieve and rage and slowly accept that her wedding day had also been the day her world collapsed. Tell him I'll call him after the interview, Linda said. He says it's about the case, about the Blackwoods. He has information you need to hear. Linda stared at her reflection. In 3 days, she'd become someone who commanded national attention. Someone whose investigation had exposed billion-dollar corruption. Someone whose name was being mentioned alongside legendary prosecutors and investigative journalists. But right now, looking at her own eyes in the small mirror, she was just a mother whose relationship with her son was balanced on a knife's edge. 2 minutes, Martinez, Jake called. Send him in, Linda said, but make it quick. Michael appeared in the doorway, and Linda was struck by how much he'd aged in just 3 days. His usually pristine appearance was wrinkled and disheveled. His eyes were rimmed with red, and he needed a shave. This wasn't the polished young professional who'd posed so confidently with the Blackwood family on Saturday. This was someone who'd had his entire worldview shattered. Mom, I need to tell you something about the Blackwoods. About things I saw, but DIDN single quotes, didn't understand at the time. Linda's attention sharpened. What kind of things? Conversations? Meetings. I was at their house a lot over the past year, for dinners and family events. There were always people coming and going, businessmen, other politicians, people from overseas. They'd have these intense conversations in the senator's study, and then everyone would come out laughing and shaking hands. Michael sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs. I thought it was just politics. Networking. The way influential people do business. But after seeing the news coverage, reading the details of your investigation, I think I witnessed some of the meetings you've been tracking. Linda felt her prosecutor instincts kick in. Tell me exactly what you remember. There was this one dinner in March. Sophia and I were there for her mother's birthday. This man came by afterward, older guy, expensive suit, some kind of European accent. He and the senator went into the study for about an hour. When they came out, the man handed Catherine an envelope. She just smiled and put it in her purse like it was a birthday card. Do you remember anything else about this man? His name? What he looked like? Tall, silver hair. Spoke with what sounded like a Russian accent. The senator called him Victor something. Linda's pulse quickened. Viktor Petrov was one of the key figures in her investigation, a Russian oligarch whose money had been traced through multiple shell companies connected to Blackwood Capital Management. If Michael had witnessed a direct meeting between Petrov and Senator Blackwood, it could be crucial testimony. There's more, Michael continued. In April, there was another dinner. This time it was David's girlfriend's families, some tech executives from California. They were talking about campaign contributions, about ways to maximize impact without triggering reporting requirements. I remember thinking it sounded like legal gray area stuff, the kind of thing rich people probably do, all the time. Linda was taking notes now, her lawyer brain cataloging every detail. Anyone else? Lots of people. There was this banker from the Cayman Islands who came to Easter dinner. There were these investors from Dubai who showed up at Sophia's graduation party. Always the same pattern: dinner with family, then private meetings in the study, then everyone shaking hands and smiling. 1 minute, Ms. Martinez. Jake called from outside. Linda looked at her son, really looked at him. Michael, why are you telling me this now? Because I realized something, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I realized that while I was being welcomed into their family, while I was feeling so proud to be accepted by these powerful, successful people, they were committing crimes. While I was enjoying their dinners and their connections and their approval, you were working 16-hour days to expose them. He met her eyes for the first time since entering the room, and I realized that I chose their approval over your respect. I chose being included in their world over including you in mine. I was so desperate to belong somewhere impressive that I forgot I already belonged somewhere real. Linda felt something crack open in her chest. Not forgiveness that would take time, but recognition. This was the first time since he'd become an adult that Michael was seeing her clearly, seeing himself clearly, seeing the choice he'd made and its consequences. "Ms. Martinez, we're live in 30 seconds, Jake said, opening the door. Linda stood up, straightening her blazer, different one this time. Royal blue instead of navy, chosen specifically for television. "Michael, I need to go do this interview, but we're going to continue this conversation, and you're going to need to speak. With the federal prosecutors, what you witnessed could be evidence, I know. I'm ready to testify. Whatever it takes." Linda paused at the door. "Are you prepared for what that means? Testifying against your wife's family? The media attention? The way this will complicate your marriage?" Michael nodded slowly. "Sophia and I talked about it. She wants the truth to come out too. She says she'd rather be married to someone who tells the truth than someone who protects criminals, even if they're her parents." Linda felt a spark of respect for her daughter-in-law. It took courage to choose justice over family loyalty, especially when that family had given you everything. "Then we'll do this together," Linda said. Mother and son, fighting for what's right? The Good Morning America interview went differently than the previous ones. Instead of just discussing the investigation and the charges against the Blackwoods, Linda found herself talking about family, about integrity, about the choice between personal loyalty and moral duty. "Ms. Martinez," the anchor asked, "you spent 8 months investigating this case while your son was planning his wedding to the senator's daughter. That must have created some difficult personal dynamics." "It did," Linda admitted. "There were moments when I wondered if I should have disclosed the investigation to my son earlier, but the integrity of the case had to come first. Justice can't be compromised by personal relationships. And now your son is reportedly prepared to testify as a witness in the federal case." "My son is prepared to tell the truth about what he witnessed. That's what we've both committed to, the truth, regardless of personal cost." After the interview, Linda found Michael still waiting in the conference room, talking quietly with Rebecca about the witness protection protocols for federal cases. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Good. Strange, but good. Michael, I need you to understand something. This case is going to dominate the next year of my life, maybe longer. There will be congressional hearings, federal trials, probably a book deal, and documentary offers. I'm not going back to being invisible. I don't want you to be invisible, and I need you to understand that our relationship is going to be different now, not just because of what happened at the wedding, but because of who I'm becoming. I'm not just going to be your mother anymore. I'm going to be a public figure, someone with a platform and influence and responsibilities beyond our family." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "I think I'm starting to understand that, and I think I like this version of you. The one who doesn't shrink back, who doesn't make herself smaller to make other people comfortable." Linda felt tears, threatening for the first time since Sunday morning. "I needed to hear that. I'm proud of you, Mom. I should have said that on Saturday, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the work you've done, proud of your courage, proud to be your son." They sat together in the conference room, surrounded by the detritus of media, transformation lighting equipment, makeup cases, interview notes. Outside, Linda could see news vans still parked on the street, reporters still hoping for additional angles on the story. "What happens next?" Michael asked. Linda looked at her calendar, packed with interviews, depositions, strategy meetings, and congressional testimony preparation. "Next, we change the world. We make sure that what the Blackwoods did never happens again. We show other corrupt politicians and business leaders that there are consequences for betraying the public trust. And personally, what happens with us?" Linda considered the question carefully. "We figure it out as we go. We build something new, something based on mutual respect, instead of you taking me for granted and me accepting invisibility." Michael nodded. "I'd like that. It's not going to be easy, but we'll do it together." Linda smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt since Saturday afternoon, before the family photos that excluded her, before the toasts that ignored her, before she'd learned that invisibility could transform into visibility overnight. "Yes," she said. "We'll do it together." Outside, her phone was buzzing with interview requests from 60 Minutes, with meeting requests from literary agents, with speaking invitations from law schools and professional organizations. Tomorrow, there would be more interviews, more testimony preparation, more strategy sessions for the trial that would define her career. But right now, in this moment, Linda Martinez was simply a mother having an honest conversation with her son, a mother who had refused to stay invisible, and a son who was finally learning to see her clearly. It was enough. For now, it was enough. 6 months later, Linda stood at the podium in the Federal District Court of Connecticut, addressing a packed courtroom that included senators, FBI directors, international journalists, and her son Michael in the third row. The Blackwood trial had become the most closely watched white-collar prosecution in decades, and today was Linda's final day of testimony. Ms. Martinez, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, "Can you tell the jury what ultimately motivated you to pursue this investigation with such dedication?" Linda looked out at the courtroom. Senator Blackwood sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, a far cry from the commanding figure who'd posed so confidently at his daughter's wedding. Catherine Blackwood stared at her hands, her political wife's polish replaced by the hollow look of someone whose entire identity had crumbled. David Blackwood appeared to be taking notes, perhaps still believing he could strategize his way out of federal prison at the prosecution table. Linda's evidence, a team months of meticulous investigation, was stacked in neat boxes. Bank records, email communications, encrypted messages, witness testimonies, financial transactions that traced dirty money across 3 continents and through dozens of shell companies. "I was motivated by the belief that no one is above the law," Linda said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "Not senators, not wealthy investors, not powerful families. When I discovered evidence that American political campaigns were being illegally funded by foreign nationals, when I found proof that campaign finance laws were being systematically violated to benefit private interests, I knew I had an obligation to pursue justice regardless of personal cost." "And what were those personal costs, Ms. Martinez?" He was sitting next to Sophia, who had courageously chosen to attend the trial despite the pain of watching her family face justice. Sophia had filed for divorce in January, not out of anger toward Michael, but because she needed to rebuild her identity completely separate from both the Blackwood name and the Martinez investigation. It was an amicable separation, born of mutual respect and shared trauma rather than betrayal or resentment. "The investigation required me to maintain secrecy from people I cared about, including my own family," Linda said. "It meant working 8 days for months. It meant making choices between personal relationships and professional integrity. It meant accepting that some people might see my pursuit of justice as a betrayal of social loyalty." The question she'd been asking herself for months: "I regret that the investigation caused pain for innocent people, including my daughter-in-law, who was as much a victim of her family's crimes as anyone else. I regret that corruption had become so normalized in certain circles that exposing it felt like a personal attack, rather than a public service. But I don't regret pursuing justice. I don't regret refusing to remain silent when I had evidence of billion-dollar fraud." The courtroom was silent except for the soft clicking of reporters' keyboards and the occasional shuffle of papers. "Ms. Martinez, you've become something of a national figure since this case began. How has that changed your life?" Linda smiled slightly. 6 months ago, I was someone who preferred to work behind the scenes. I was comfortable being invisible, being the person who got things done without seeking recognition. This case forced me to step into the spotlight, to become a public advocate for accountability and justice." She paused, glancing again at Michael, who was nodding encouragingly. "I've learned that visibility comes with responsibility. I've been invited to speak at law schools, to advise other prosecutors on complex financial crimes, to serve on ethics committees and oversight boards. I've learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay invisible." The prosecution wrapped up their questioning, and Linda prepared for cross-examination from the defense. Senator Blackwood's attorney, a man named Harrison Curtis, approached the witness stand with the confidence of someone who specialized in discrediting prosecutors. "Ms. Martinez, isn't it true that you had personal motivations for pursuing this case beyond simple justice?" Linda had been expecting this line of attack. "Can you be more specific? Isn't it true that you resented the Blackwood family's wealth and influence? That you felt excluded from their social circles and decided to use your position as a prosecutor to exact revenge?" Linda felt a flash of anger, but her months of testimony preparation had taught her to channel that energy into clarity rather than defensiveness. "Mr. Curtis, my investigation began 8 months before my son even met Sophia Blackwood. The evidence I uncovered, bank records, email communications, witness testimonies, exists independently of any personal relationship. The $1 billion in illegal transactions, you felt that the Blackwood family looked down on you?" Linda looked directly at Curtis, then let her gaze sweep across the courtroom, taking in the packed gallery of journalists, legal observers, and citizens who had come to witness this historic trial. "Mr. Curtis, 6 months ago, I might have felt excluded from certain social circles. Today, I'm testifying before a federal court in one of the most significant corruption cases in American history. I've been invited to speak at Harvard Law School, to advise the Department of Justice on campaign finance reform, and to serve on congressional oversight committees. I've received offers from publishers, documentary filmmakers, and think tanks. She leaned forward slightly. If I was excluded from the Blackwood family's social circle, I'd say that exclusion was the best thing that ever happened to my career. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the courtroom, and Linda saw several jurors smiling. Curtis tried a different approach. Ms. Martinez, you've testified that you worked alone on this investigation for months. Isn't it unusual for such a complex case to be handled by a single attorney? I wasn't working alone. I was working with FBI financial crime specialists, forensic accountants, international banking experts, and prosecutors from 3 different federal districts. What I did alone was refuse to be intimidated by powerful people who thought their connections would protect them from scrutiny. The cross-examination continued for another hour, but Curtis made little headway against Linda's calm fact-based responses. When she finally stepped down from the witness stand, Linda felt a profound sense of completion. 18 months of investigation, 6 months of media attention, weeks of testimonial leading to this moment. As she walked past the defendant's table, Senator Blackwood looked up and met her eyes. For a moment, she saw not the confident politician who had dominated his daughter's wedding, but a broken man facing the consequences of his choices. Linda felt no satisfaction in his downfall, no sense of personal victory, just the quiet fulfillment of knowing that justice was being served. Outside the courthouse, the media scrum was waiting. Linda had learned to navigate these sessions with the same methodical approach she brought to legal preparation: answer questions directly, stay focused on the facts, don't let personal emotions distract from the larger issues at stake. Ms. Martinez, what do you think this case says about corruption in American politics? It says that our institutions work. When people are willing to do the difficult work of holding powerful individuals accountable, it says that justice doesn't depend on wealth or political connections. What's next for you professionally? Linda smiled. I'm returning to my practice, but I'll also be working with the Department of Justice on campaign finance reform initiatives. I've been asked to help develop training programs for prosecutors handling complex financial crimes. I want to make sure that other attorneys have the tools and support they need to pursue cases like this one. Any personal plans? How has this experience affected your family relationships? Linda's eyes found Michael in the crowd of reporters and observers. He was standing next to Rebecca, both of them beaming with pride. This experience has taught me that personal relationships built on mutual respect and shared values are the ones that survive difficult times. My son and I have had to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than expectation. We're closer now than we've been in years. After the media interviews, Linda, Michael, and Rebecca went to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in downtown Hartford, the same place where Linda used to grab quick meals during her late-night investigation sessions. It felt appropriate somehow to celebrate the case's conclusion in a place that had sustained her during its most difficult phases. So what's it like being the most famous attorney in Connecticut? Rebecca asked, raising her wine glass. Surreal, Linda admitted. 6 months ago, I was invisible at my own son's wedding. Now I can't go to the grocery store without someone recognizing me from television. Any regrets about becoming so public? Michael asked. Linda considered the question. I miss the simplicity of my old life sometimes. I miss being able to work on cases without wondering if they'll end up on the evening news. But I don't miss feeling like I had to make myself smaller to make other people comfortable. You're different now, Michael observed. More confident, more present. I think I spent years believing that being supportive meant being invisible. That being a good mother meant never overshadowing anyone else's accomplishments. This case taught me that there's a difference between being humble and being invisible. Michael nodded thoughtfully. I owe you an apology that I've never properly given. Not just for the wedding photos, but for years of taking you for granted. For treating your support like it was automatic instead of recognizing it as a choice you made every day. Linda reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We both made mistakes. You took me for granted, and I let you. I enabled my own invisibility, because it felt easier than demanding recognition. What's different now? Now I know what I'm worth. Not just as your mother, but as a professional, as a person, as someone who has something valuable to contribute to the world. And I'm not going back to being invisible. Rebecca raised her glass again. To Linda Martinez, who refused to stay. In the shadows, they clinked glasses, and Linda felt the weight of the past 18 months settling into something like peace. The investigation was complete. The testimony was finished, and justice was being served. But more than that, she had discovered parts of herself that had been dormant for years. 2 weeks later, the verdicts came in. Senator Richard Blackwood, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Catherine Blackwood, guilty on conspiracy and money laundering charges, sentenced to 8 years. David Blackwood, guilty on multiple counts, sentenced to 12 years. Linda watched the verdicts from her office, surrounded by her colleagues and a small group of reporters. When the final guilty verdict was read, the room erupted in applause. But Linda felt only quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, but the victory felt less personal than she'd expected. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Proud of you, Mom, always have been, even when I didn't know how to show it." She smiled and typed back, "Thank you. That means everything." That evening, Linda stood in her apartment, the same small, modest space where she'd cried quiet tears 6 months earlier. Anne looked at the wall where she'd hung her commendations and news clippings from the case. Photos of her testifying before Congress, magazine covers featuring her investigation, letters from law students and young prosecutors who'd been inspired by her work. She was no longer the invisible woman who'd been excluded from family photos. She was Linda Martinez, the attorney who'd brought down a U.S. senator, the prosecutor who'd exposed billion-dollar corruption, the woman who'd refused to stay silent when she had evidence of crimes. But she was also still a mother, still someone who cared deeply about her relationships, still someone who valued family and loyalty and love. The difference was that now she understood the difference between loyalty and enabling, between supporting someone and making herself invisible. She'd learned that the most powerful thing she could do was refuse to shrink, refuse to hide, refuse to let anyone treat her like she didn't matter. As she prepared for bed, Linda's phone rang one final time. It was Michael. "Mom, I just wanted to call and say thank you." "For what?" "For showing me what integrity looks like, for teaching me that doing the right thing is more important than fitting in, for proving that it's never too late to change the dynamic in a relationship." Linda smiled, looking out her window at the ordinary neighborhood where she'd lived through this extraordinary year. "You're welcome," she said. "And Michael, I'm proud of you too, for testifying, for supporting Sophia through her family's crisis, for growing up into someone who chooses truth over comfort. I learned from the best." After they hung up, Linda sat in her small kitchen with a cup of tea, thinking about the journey from invisibility to visibility, from background support to center stage, from quiet acceptance to loud advocacy. Tomorrow, there would be new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to fight for justice. There would be speaking engagements and consulting work, and perhaps that book deal her agent kept mentioning. There would be a life built on visibility rather than invisibility, on demanding respect rather than hoping for recognition. But tonight, she was simply Linda Martinez, sitting in her kitchen, drinking tea, and feeling profoundly grateful for the wedding photo that had excluded her, the moment of invisibility that had sparked her transformation into someone who could no longer be ignored. Sometimes the best thing that could happen to you was being forced to see yourself clearly. Sometimes the most painful rejection was actually the beginning of the most important recognition. Linda finished her tea, turned off the lights, and went to bed as the woman who'd refused to stay invisible and, in doing so, had changed everything.